Hello there everyone, my name is Jakejames Lugo, and welcome to the channel, where you'll find some of the most fair and honest game reviews out here.
Hello there.
And I'm back again with the Star Wars game Ultimate Tier List, talking about every single Star Wars game released for a specific platform or specific ecosystem. We talked about everything involving PlayStation games and PlayStation consoles beforehand. Now we're going to do every Star Wars game on an Xbox platform. This is the Ultimate Star Wars game tier list for Xbox games. Every single Star Wars game, as you can see here, I have tier list maker open with every single Star Wars game released for an Xbox console. Now we're not doing PC games because that's a whole other separate list that probably will be pretty big in of itself. But we're talking about Xbox platforms, so that means everything involving the original Xbox release, Xbox 360, Xbox One, and Xbox Series S/Series X. So all those Xbox consoles. Luckily, there's no portable platforms to deal with. There's no other crazy other consoles to deal with. It's pretty simple and straightforward when it comes to Xbox games for Star Wars, which is nice because we got a lot of big ones to talk about, a lot of classic, a lot of iconic Star Wars games.
A surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one.
But regardless, though, let's get started because there's some good ones to get into. So to kick things off, let's start things over with one of the games that I didn't really talk about in my previous video when it comes to PlayStation games, and I wanted to talk about here, Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, the game.
What?
Now, the reason why I didn't talk about this in my previous video for PlayStation games is because, one, the image for the actual cover art didn't load into Tier List Maker for some odd reason. And number two, this was also another big game on the Xbox platforms that a lot of people played. And I would argue, or at least there's an argument to be made, that this Star Wars game was played more on the Xbox than it was on the PlayStation. But you have to go to the numbers to figure that out. But regardless, though, I reviewed Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith here on the channel. I have a full video of it if you want more specific details. But is Star Wars Episode 3 a good game overall, as a good Star Wars game? Is it absolute S tier or is it trash tier? Okay, S, A, B, C, D, or trash. Here's the funny thing. Number one, Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith was released before the full theatrical release of the film. So before the movie hit theaters, this game was out. So this was like your first sneak peek at Episode 3 footage, which was unbelievably hype for a lot of people. I remember that time with all the marketing, with everything else, it was pretty freaking hype. If you grew up during the prequel era, watching these movies in theaters, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And the game was pretty fun because not only was it a co-op beat-em-up or a co-op brawler, an action game, which was awesome. You get to play as Anakin and Obi-Wan together. That's freaking sweet. But also, even as a single-player game, this was pretty good for a Star Wars game. I mean, it does have its technical issues, let's be real.
What?
It has technical issues as far as some of the control stuff here and there, bugs and glitches, and a few instances of collision detection issues. But overall, to me personally, like I said in my review, this is still some of the best lightsaber combat or versus modes that's out there for a Star Wars game. A lot of people would go to other games, which we'll probably talk about in a bit, but this one, as far as being a simple, straight-up action game, it's pretty darn good. So for me personally, I'm going to give Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith a B tier. I said that in a little note if you were eagle-eyed in my previous PlayStation tier list video, where I said this is going to be in B tier, and here's why. But there you go. Here's why. So Episode 3, starting off strong with a solid B tier. Moving on. Let's go to the Clone Wars. The Clone Wars, I'm going to drop this in C tier.
I've got a bad feeling about this.
Very similar to what I did on the last list. It's low on the actual tier list. And the main reason being is because even though there's going to be some repetition with some of the games released for multiple platforms, a lot of my views are still going to be very similar because there's very little difference between these games on various platforms, with a few exceptions, of course. But with the Clone Wars, it was the very first Clone Wars game to ever come out right before or right around the time of the release of Episode 2 Attack of the Clones. There's a lot more vehicle combat than on-the-ground combat. You do get to play as a few Jedi, including Mace Windu, including Anakin Skywalker, but really, this is like a prototype version of what we would actually see with the Clone Wars and video games, and it wasn't all that great. It had a lot of controller issues, had a lot of bugs and glitches, all that jazz. So C tier for Star Wars The Clone Wars. Moving on, right? Okay, that again, we're still in the original Xbox era. So this is how we're going to do it. We're going to go Xbox, Xbox 360, Xbox One, Xbox Series X. So more original Xbox. Let's go to Star Wars Obi-Wan.
Hello there.
This is a Star Wars game that not a lot of people have played. Now, I've talked about this a few times in places like TikTok and a few other spots, and a lot of people have nostalgia for this game, but it's only really the ones that have played it, because many other people knew about it, but never really played this. This is an action game, third-person action game. Takes place around the time of Episode 1, I want to say. and it stars a young Obi-Wan Kenobi, which is cool. Everybody loves Obi-Wan Kenobi. However, there's a lot of controller problems. Things are very janky, very stiff. There is a couple bugs and glitches here and there, not as bad as you might think.
I have a bad feeling about this.
But overall, the thing is that if you want a good game starring Obi-Wan Kenobi that takes place around the same time frame, you're better off playing Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, on PlayStation. That's just a hard fact. At least in my opinion, I find that to be the better game, even though both games have their problems. You could argue that Obi-Wan Kenobi has better visuals, has better, just overall better action and stuff. And again, I think that's very debatable. But if I had to choose where to place this on the tier list, this is not trash tier. This is not a trash tier game, but I'm going to put this in a solid C tier as well, because it's okay, it's decent for what it is. It just has those issues that hold it back from being truly enjoyable or truly great as a Star Wars game. So I find that to be at least fair enough to place that on the tier list compared to every other Star Wars game that's on an Xbox platform.
You were the chosen one! It was said that you would destroy this Sith, not join them!
Now, moving on from there, it's some more original Xbox games. Let's go with a classic, Republic Commando. This one, if you're a big Clone Wars fan, you know this game, especially if you grew up around the time when this game was fresh on the original Xbox. This game is solid. This is a solid A-tier game.
Proceed with the next phase.
The reason why I say that Republic Commando is A-tier is because it's very different, it's very original in comparison to many other Star Wars games at the time. Its style is original because this is like a really gritty take on the Clone Wars. We haven't seen the Clone Wars kind of like this, which is really cool. It focuses mostly on the clones, so there's not a lot of Jedi that make an appearance here. There's not a lot of Force use and stuff. Even though there is, like, communications that you have with characters like Yoda, which is, like, towards the very end of the game. But it reminds me a little bit of Rainbow Six or Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon, but for a Star Wars setting, which is very cool. You get to work with your squad, you order them around, you execute different types of plans that the Republic can't really kind of do on their own time because they're dealing with the war. There's a lot of good stuff that come from Republic Commando. My only issues, and I said this in my review of Republic Commando, which I have here on the channel.
I have a bad feeling about this.
Republic Commando, the controls could be a little bit weird, especially if you're so used to first-person shooters like Halo or Call of Duty or anything very similar. There's no really, like, jumping, is that, in comparison to, like, Halo and stuff. It's a very weighty FPS, and very similar to Rainbow Six, in my opinion. But I still feel like there's a lot of great original ideas that I would love to see this concept revisited. I think it would be awesome if we got a brand new, like, Republic Commando or Imperial Commando, which is what we were supposed to get. We were supposed to get a sequel to this game, and we never got it, which is a damn shame because the concept is dope and the execution is pretty darn good. But if there was a follow-through with it and they kept the series going, it could have been just as big as Rainbow Six or just as big as Ghost Recon. But that's just my opinion. As far as this game is concerned, it's a solid A-tier Star Wars game on the Xbox platform, which I think is great.
Some vector, Commander.
Retreating vector.
So moving on, more original Xbox. Star Wars Starfighter Special Edition. This game, I want to say, is a solid C-tier game as well. The reason why this is getting into C tier, and it's very similar to how I scored it over in the PlayStation tier list, is because, again, it's an interesting Starfighter game. It's an interesting thing focusing on space combat, which is cool. This version of the game has a little bit more than the PlayStation 2 version, which is great. We like more content out here. But again, it's not as fun and it's not as interesting as the Rogue Squadron series. I don't think it's as good as the Battlefront series when it comes to space combat. It's a focus on Starfighter combat, and it takes place during the time of episode 1, 2, around 1 or 2, I want to say. But still, just not as good as some of the other games, which I feel like did the concept a little bit better. But that's where I'm putting Starfighter, solid C-tier game. Moving on from there, let's go with the original Star Wars Battlefront. This is a B-tier game right here on the Xbox platforms.
We've captured a command post.
Very similar to how I scored the original on the PlayStation platforms. I think that for some people, playing this game on the Xbox meant going online with Xbox Live, which is great. Either, the whole system link, the whole Xbox Live online gameplay, which is cool. You couldn't really do that on the PlayStation 2, which is fine because different tech for a different time. But still, if you loved Star Wars games, if you love third-person or first-person shooters, if you like online games, you definitely should check this out. However, it is not as good compared to the games that came later on afterwards. Its sequel and many of the other games that its descendants are. But overall, still, I think that Battlefront 1, the original Battlefront from Pandemic, is still a solid game overall, especially on the original Xbox. But I digress. That's just my opinion. Moving on from there, more original Xbox. Let's talk about Star Wars Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast. This game right here if I really had to score it, it's not trash. This is not a trash tier game. This is definitely one of those games that I feel like if you're a big Star Wars fan, especially if you play a lot on the Xbox platforms, you have to play this. I'm going to put this as a solid A tier game. Solid A tier game, not an S tier. And the reason why it's not an S tier is because there are some issues that I feel like got a little bit better with its sequel and other games that probably handled things a little bit better as far as aiming is concerned. It's a little bit stiff and janky when it comes to some of the aiming stuff. Granted, if you're playing on PC, because this game was released on PC and on the GameCube, it's a little bit better as far as like how smooth and how precise you could be. But on an Xbox, if we're playing just on the original Xbox, the game is good. Original story set after Return of the Jedi, starring an original character that's been around for a hot minute. That originally, technically, this is part of the Jedi Knight series, which started with Star Wars Dark Forces, but this is just leaps and bounds better than those original games, both the Dark Forces and the original Jedi Knight.
A surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one.
Jedi Knight 2, Jedi Outcast, I feel like is when the series really hit its stride, got the lightsaber combat right, which is awesome for a lot of people. It just never really got the FPS gameplay as good. Like, you want to actually get your lightsaber as fast as you can in this game in comparison to using all the other weapons that it offers to you. So, the story is interesting, not as good as it possibly could be, but for the time, being an expanded universe game with a story that's set after Return of the Jedi, I thought it was pretty darn cool. But I put it in a solid A tier for those reasons specifically.
Impressive. Most impressive.
Moving on from there, okay? Let's go with Lego Star Wars, the video game. Again, I'm putting this in solid B tier because very similar to what I did previously, okay, with the original Lego Star Wars on PlayStation 2. Great game, fun to play through, very cheeky as a parody of Star Wars. You play through the first 3 original games, which is great. However, later games in the series got so much better, at least in my personal opinion. It's just leaps and bounds better when it comes to how enjoyable and how much content was made available to those games for players, which is cool, which is totally fun. Now, let's get to a good one. Let's get to a beefy good one. Let's go with Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Automatic S tier Star Wars game. This is hands down one of the best Star Wars games of all time. That you have to play this if you have not played it. And now I understand the combat hasn't aged all that well. It is not for everybody. It's very similar to almost like a pseudo turn-based D&D format with a little bit of real-time action stuff. But the way that it's kind of built hasn't aged all that well. But this is one of the best Star Wars games when it comes to story, when it comes to atmosphere, and the amount of freedom you have to roam around in a galaxy, I should say, where there's a lot of places you could go visit and do things. There's one of the best twists in a story for the plot of a Star Wars game, which is huge. For many people, you didn't see stuff like that back in the day from many other Star Wars games, especially for one set so long prior to the original Star Wars movies. This is set 4,000 years prior to the start of Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, or I believe 4,000 years and change from Episode 4, A New Hope, which is fantastic because it's familiar. There's a lot of echoes and parallels to what we know for Star Wars, but it allows you to kind of go on this tale, go on this journey as an original character that gets involved with the Jedi Order, I should say, the Sith, and all the other stuff going on with the galaxy in this time frame within the Star Wars galaxy. It is very cool. It is still a phenomenal game. To me personally, still holds up. I did a whole review of this game on my channel that you could go watch where I talked about all this stuff. It is still so cool to be able to go into that game and just feel like you're in a Star Wars story and just have a ball with it, with your own original character, your own original version of Revan, which is dope. Bastila Shan is a fantastic character. Darth Malak is an awesome villain. There's a lot of great stuff in here that I feel like many people will get a real kick out of. And I'm so disappointed that the remake of this game, Knights of the Old Republic remake, is in limbo right now with Embracer Group, with Saber Interactive, what happened with Aspire. It's such a damn shame because this is truly one of the best Star Wars games of all time. Now let's move on. We got some more original Xbox games to get through. We got a pretty good, meaty, solid list so far. From even though we got one S tier game, but look how populated this is as far as the placement of the games are concerned. Look, this right here is a really solid list. It's a really solid list for any Star Wars fan. Let me know your thoughts about this in the comment section down below. Do you agree or disagree with some of my placement of some of these games? These are classics, guys. Supreme classics. But moving on from there, let's talk about another game that's for the original Xbox. Where is it? Let's see, I'm just kind of like scrolling through. Which one should I go to? There's a couple I could kind of go to here. Let's go with the original Battlefront 2. Again, another S-tier Star Wars game.
That's another command post under Republic control. Enemy reinforcements are decreasing.
Now we've got 2 S-tier Star Wars games. Why is this an S-tier game? There's a couple different reasons that make it a little bit more so than what I said for the original PlayStation version or PlayStation 2 version of this game. Battlefront 2 has more content on the Xbox. It has not only more maps, which are maps from the original Battlefront, Renvar, and I believe also Bespin, but they also have new characters, new heroes that you could play as. You get to play as Kit Fisto and Asajj Ventress from the Clone Wars series. As far as I know, that's the first time she appears in a video game that's playable, which is very cool. Instead of having her traditional lightsabers, she actually has these nunchuck lightsabers, which is pretty wild. It's like, I've never seen that anywhere else in a Star Wars game. She has Asajj Ventress in Battlefront 2. If you don't believe me, go look up footage for this after you watch this video. She has nunchuck lightsabers, which is dope. Like, if you ever seen those memes of Bruce Lee wielding nunchucks, but they turn them into lightsabers, it's like that, son. And it's freaking awesome.
For the Republic!
Overall, as a game, Battlefront 2 is still a lot of fun to play. This version of the game has online play. It has multiple maps. It has the Galactic Conquest, the campaign mode that has Tamora Morrison doing the voices of the 501st clones. It has a bunch of maps, including more in this version of the game to play through in instant action. This is just a dope, solid, amazing Star Wars game that is also a must-play. If you own an original Xbox, or if you did back in the day, chances are you had Battlefront 2 and you had Knights of the Old Republic 1, which was dope. So, 2 fantastic Star Wars games, but this one, Battlefront 2, must-play, automatic S tier for that game.
Command post is under Republic control. Hostile reinforcements are being depleted.
We've got a few more left here that are original Xbox. So, Star Wars Jedi Knight Jedi Academy, okay? This game, to me, is fun. This game is interesting. It's an original story set after the events of Jedi Outcast, which is after Return of the Jedi. It follows a little bit of Kyle Katarn, but you actually create your own character in this game. It has a lot more multiplayer mode stuff, which is cool. You get to customize your lightsaber, you get to customize the look of your character, your force powers, which are really easy, like really just, easy to get into and stuff. The lightsaber combat in this game is still, for many people, some of the best it's ever been in the entire Star Wars franchise, which is cool, and I understand that. So where does this rank in the tier list? Okay, is this like a must-play, like an S tier, or is it trash tier? Well, I can tell you right now, it's not any of these 3 down here. It's not C, D, or trash tier. So where to place it here? Well, not only do we have a great multiplayer mode, which is still fun to play for many people, we have an original story that I don't think is as good as Jedi Outcast as far as story is concerned, because again, you're playing an original character. You're not really following Kyle Katarn like that. Kyle Katarn is more kind of like your mentor, or like one of your these side characters that, you're kind of just taking orders from, which is a bummer because the Jedi series has always been about Kyle Katarn at its core when you really think about it and you really look at it for all the games ever since Dark Forces. But still, there's a lot of great stuff going on with this game. And by the way, the PC version of Jedi Academy has all these mods that people have messed with since way back in the day on PC, that they even made like these awesome like renditions of this, like Star Wars movie duels, comes from the basic bare bones foundation of Jedi Academy, which is awesome. So if I had to place this is another S tier Star Wars game. Straight up. Now I know some people are going to disagree with me, but the reason why I say this is because this game still has relevance and it has resonance amongst Star Wars fans even today. It's still used for mods on PC. It's still fun to play through. It still has a lot of good stuff going for it. Some quality of life things a little bit different than Jedi Outcast, but still around the same type of vibe and the same type of stuff you got from that first game. But an original character you could create, original story to follow, and the multiplayer mode. So to me, that it has the makings of a great, solid Star Wars game that definitely deserves to be an S tier. So if you disagree with me, let me know in the comment section down below, especially if you played this game a lot. Would you put other games above this one? But I believe that's at least a fair placement for Jedi Academy because I think it's still good. I think it's still very well made and just fun to play through. Again, check out my review if you don't believe me. I go into a lot more detail about this game in that full video review because there's so much to talk about with this. We have one more original Xbox game. Yeah, as far as I can tell, yeah, that's the last original Xbox game that we could do. Or actually, no. Technically, we got 2. So, actually, no, that's the Xbox 360. So, no. We got one more original Xbox game. Knights of the Old Republic 2. Now, this is where I think, people are not going to like what I have to say. And it's not even all that bad, but you know how the internet can be sometimes. Knights of the Old Republic 2 is a game that I haven't really fully completed yet, but I've spent enough time with it enough to speak about it. And the main reason why that is because this game has a lot of bugs and has a lot of technical issues. It was made by Obsidian Entertainment. It wasn't done by BioWare, but it was still a good follow-up for Knights of the Old Republic 2, or Knights of the Old Republic 1. However, it still had issues with it where not all the content was included into it, but also a lot of technical bugs and glitches and other like problems arise during the game, which could be a little bit annoying, especially if you're trying to play it through from start to finish. And on PC, you need to get some of the mods in order to make it a little bit more stable. But if we remove all that stuff with mods and such, if we just take it at face value, is this still a very solid Star Wars game? Is it a solid Star Wars game that you could go to and enjoy? There's been re-releases of Knights of the Old Republic 2 on Nintendo Switch, by the way, most recently, which is a shame because that version of the game is broken. So I'm not talking about that version. We're talking strictly the Xbox version of KOTOR 2. So is it still good? And is it still great? Is it better than the original? I would say no. I don't think KOTOR 2 is better than the original. And that's more of a preference thing because of the story, because of some of the things that are going on. I still think that the story of KOTOR 1 is better because of the twist and because of certain concepts and ideas that it introduces into the Star Wars franchise that I don't think KOTOR 2 really follows up as well as it probably should. But that doesn't take away from how good the game is. So if I had to place this game on the tier list, I'm going to put it in A tier.
I don't believe that. And you're sounding like a separatist.
Again, for some people, they might say that KOTOR 2 might be an S-tier game, but I think that some of those other little issues that I mentioned hold it back from being truly great. And I feel like if you don't play KOTOR 2, I don't think you're missing much. I still think you should play it, especially if you love Knights of the Old Republic, especially if you like Xbox Star Wars games. But still, if I had a choice to say like which is like the most mandatory Star Wars games to play, I'm going to always choose KOTOR 1 over KOTOR 2. And again, that's a preference thing. I understand that KOTOR 2 has all the darker elements from the Star Wars universe, or at least from the Sith side of things. Things get really dark and really crazy with its story, which is awesome, which is great. But all those other issues with the technical problems and the gameplay, some of the other things that I mentioned, I feel like just hold it back a little bit much to put KOTOR 1 above it, in my personal opinion. But I digress, though. Tell me your thoughts in the comments down below. Agree or disagree with the likes. Tell me if you like it, if you agree with me on that, or not. Just let me know your thoughts. So now, let's go to Xbox 360 games. We talked about all the original Xbox games, but now let's talk about Xbox 360 Star Wars games, where things start to get a little bit more interesting. Starting off, I'm going to go towards Star Wars... Actually, no, that's Xbox One. No. Let's go to Lego Star Wars 3, The Clone Wars. This is a solid B-tier game. I'm going to put it right there. Much like the original Lego Star Wars, I find it to have like the voice acting and stuff. It's still very good. It's fun to play through. I don't think it's as good as some of the other Lego Star Wars games, in my personal opinion, as a preference, but it's still very solid for what it is. If you enjoy Lego games, especially Lego Star Wars games, you can still have a fun time with it. Very similar to what I said in the PlayStation game version. I'm going to do the same thing also again with Lego Star Wars, the Complete Saga. I'm going to put it in solid A tier. This is a very solid A tier game that I think is fun to play through. All 6 original Star Wars saga films. A lot of collectibles, a lot of content to go through. If you love Lego games, that's definitely one that you should play. It's still not as good in my personal opinion as the Skywalker Saga, but I digress. It's still a very solid game. Xbox 360 also, Lego Star Wars 2, I'm going to say the same thing. Lego Star Wars 2 is another solid A-tier game. I still think that Complete Saga is a little bit better with the sheer amount of content that's offered, but it's still very fun to play through the original 3 Star Wars movies in Lego form with its parody and stuff. It's just a fun time overall. Now, let's go to Lego's, Star Wars, The Clone Wars Republic Heroes, okay? I'm going to put this in C tier.
I've got a bad feeling about this, sir.
Much like I said in the previous video, I find that the technical issues, the bugs and glitches could be a problem, the controls could be a little bit of an issue. It's still fun to play through if you like the Clone Wars animated series. If you have a friend to go through it with co-op, it could be fun. But as comparison to all these other games on the Xbox platforms, I don't think it's as good. I don't think it's as fun to play as Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith. I think that's a far better co-op game. I don't think it's as good to play as Battlefront 1, nor Lego Star Wars 1 and 3. Like, I just think that as far as co-op games for Star Wars, those are better games than this one. But it's not trash. It's not trash, thank God. But it's still something that's like, not as good as some of those other games. Now, moving on to more Xbox 360. Let's go with The Force Unleashed. The Force Unleashed is an A-tier game. Like I said in my previous video, Star Killer, Sam Witwer, it's awesome. Original story, Darth Vader's Secret Apprentice. The Force is unleashed, going crazy. Some awesome third-person action gameplay. Combat is awesome. Even though it has those bugs and glitches here and there that could be a little bit of a problem with the whole type of like, you know, the physics of the game and stuff, it's still a lot of fun to play through. Speaking of which, going all the way down to C tier is The Force Unleashed 2, because like I said, this game is short. This game has a problem with its bugs and glitches, a little bit more so than the original. The story isn't as good in my personal opinion. I wish that it had more development time to be a little bit better overall, because I feel like more people would like this game. And the fact that we didn't get the Lego, Star Wars The Force Unleashed 3 that was planned out makes this one a little bit more saltier. So very similar to what I said in the previous video. So let's go to, do we have any more 360 games here? Lego Star Wars The Force Awakens. I'm going to put in solid B tier, like I did pretty much in the previous video. Much like the same thing I said there. It has the voice acting. It's a solid Lego game. You don't have to like the sequel trilogy. You don't even have to like The Force Awakens to acknowledge that the game is pretty solid overall as a Lego Star Wars game. Again, preferences aside, as the game itself, it's still fun and interesting to play through. There's a lot of content, a lot of collectibles, and if you're into Lego games, you can still have a lot of fun with it, much like you can with Lego Star Wars 3, The Clone Wars. Now, as far as Xbox 360 games are concerned, I think that's everything. So now we're in Xbox One territory. So that's the list so far. We did original Xbox, and we did Xbox 360. So let's talk about Xbox One and Xbox Series X, because there's only really like 1 or 2 Xbox One games. Yeah, I think at least that's what we could say, because I look at Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor as Xbox Series X games, even though I know they were probably Jedi Fallen Order was technically on Xbox One. I digress though, okay? We're in that era of Xbox games now. So let's start off with Star Wars Connect, or Connect Star Wars.
I've got a bad feeling about this.
I got a bad feeling about this.
I have a bad feeling about this.
Oh, I have a bad feeling about this.
This is a weird-ass, jumbled mess of a game. Now, I understand it's very dependent on the tech of the Xbox Connect. The Xbox Connect was an accessory, for anybody that doesn't know, that was part of the Xbox One that was like a camera that allowed you to play certain games using the camera and having yourself as the controller. The Xbox and Microsoft really tried to go hard on that, as far as like that being a reason to own an Xbox console, and it completely just failed. It completely was a disaster, because the games were very hard to control. The games just either weren't as interesting, with maybe the exception of Star Wars Connect, and a lot of people just didn't buy into it. Like, on top of that too, the actual Connect itself was a little bit overpriced, to the point that people stopped buying it, and then now these days you could probably find it for pretty cheap, but there's almost no point to owning it, especially if you don't own an Xbox One, or if you just, again, don't play a lot of games where you use a camera. Where does Star Wars Connect fall into? This had the dancing Han Solo game that everybody memes about. This had a bunch of other mini games. There was one, I believe, that was like almost like a Jedi game that it had you using a lightsaber, but it was kind of janky. It was kind of like all over the place. The concept of it sounded dope. The idea of it behind it was good-natured, was good-willed. But the execution and what we got as a product wasn't all that great. This is going down to D tier. This isn't trash. I don't think it's fair enough to say Star Wars Connect, or Connect Star Wars, is a trash game. And funny enough, I think a lot of people would say it's trash because of some of the reasons I mentioned.
What does that got to do with anything?
But as far as like a game is concerned, it still functioned. It still was there, that actually had decent ideas that just weren't executed properly. Like, there was thought behind it, but what we ended up getting just wasn't all that great. So I think D tier is at least fair to at least put that in there. It could be trash tier if just the games just didn't work, but that's not the case. Like, you could play through most of those games and they could actually function. It's just they weren't all that great. That's at least where I stand with Connect Star Wars. I've played a little bit of it over the years, and it's not any of the games that I would recommend someone to play any Star Wars game on an Xbox platform. There's all these other games you could see higher on the tier list that are much better examples of better Star Wars games. So, moving on from there, let me get this one out of the way. Lego Star Wars The Skywalker Saga. That's an S-tier game. They did it! Like I said in the previous video for PlayStation games, so much content, so many places to go to. areas to explore, a lot of characters, voice acting, all 9 Star Wars movies from the prequel, the original trilogy, and the sequel trilogy, plus DLC from some of the extra stuff from like the Disney Plus shows like Rogue One, like Ahsoka, like The Mandalorian, etc. The game is awesome. If you love Star Wars games, this, in my opinion, is the best one for LEGO Star Wars stuff. It's just that fun to play through, and there's so much content that's going to keep you busy for a long time. Moving on from there, a lot of this is going to be familiar territory, but we're just talking about Xbox game stuff. Battlefront 1 is going to be in solid B tier for the Xbox because, again, some of the best visuals for a Star Wars game overall. It just didn't have as much content as its sequels and other Star Wars Battlefront games. I felt like it could have been better overall if that wasn't the case, but for what it was still pretty darn good. It's still one of the better looking Star Wars games. That being said, Battlefront 2, I'm going to say the same thing. I'm going to put it up in solid S tier. Actually, no. You know what? I'm going to put this in solid A tier on Xbox.
What?
Because I think that the Xbox visuals I felt were good, not as good as the PlayStation visuals, in my personal opinion. And I think that as far as like games that you could go back to a lot more often, I feel like there's other Star Wars games on Xbox that you probably get more value going back to over and over again. Some people will disagree with me on that. I understand it. I still think that Battlefront 2 from EA still has some of the best visuals of the Star Wars games, or the Star Wars franchise of all time. Has more content than its predecessor. Definitely. Because it has multiple eras, all 3 eras of Star Wars games, which is good. Again, you could play it online. You could do a lot of stuff. There's no support for it anymore because EA decided to drop support, which is a darn shame. But I digress, though. It's still a solid A-tier Star Wars game, just not as good as some of the other classics I put above it.
How can you do this? This is outrageous. It's unfair.
Jedi Fallen Order, solid A-tier, same thing. Putting it there, I think it was pretty good. Better, one of the best newer stories for Star Wars that's part of the canon, starring Cal Kestis with Cameron Monaghan playing the part. The Second Sister, the combat is pretty solid. Even if you're not a big fan of the Souls-style games or Soulsborne games, this one you can still get into and really enjoy it. I feel like there's a lot of good stuff into there. Its sequel, Jedi Survivor, is an S-tier game.
Impressive. Most impressive.
That's a Star Wars game, even on the Xbox platforms. I feel like there's a lot. Everything that's great about Jedi Fallen Order made even better with another original story, a lot more locations to go visit, a lot more freedom to explore around, a lot more interesting stuff that goes on with its plot. It's a solid S-tier Star Wars game, like I said from the previous video. And then finally, the last one, Star Wars Squadrons. I'm going to put this in a solid B tier, like I did in the previous video. But yeah, I'm pretty sure I put it in B tier. Starfighter combat, it's very similar to the X-Wing and TIE Fighter series. There's a lot of there's an original story that I'm not a huge fan of, but some people like it. But I think it's cool to get behind the actual wheels of a Starfighter, an X-Wing, or a TIE Fighter. There's other ships in here, and I really wish, like I said before in my previous video, I wish that EA supported this game a little bit more with DLC. We could have gotten more ships from either canon or the expanded universe. That would have been super dope. Especially now that we have all this stuff going on with Ahsoka, with The Mandalorian, and other Star Wars projects that are coming out. It would have been so cool to see a lot of those tie-ins into a game like this, or even Battlefront 2 from EA, where we get more characters, more ships, more other stuff related to that stuff as DLC. But regardless, though, EA decided to stop supporting it, and it is what it is. So it's just basically the main base game of what we have.
I don't believe that. And you're sounding like a separatist.
There you go. This is the ultimate tier list of Star Wars games for Xbox platforms. There's no other Star Wars Xbox games as far as I know. And I went through all the research I could as far as from Wikipedia, from GameStop listings, all these different places to find out if I could make sure I got every single Star Wars game that was on an Xbox platform. Now, obviously, I'm not counting things like Star Wars Pinball. I'm not counting Angry Birds Star Wars or games like that. I feel Lego Star Wars is the closest one to a true Star Wars game compared to like some of those other like random off-brand license games that we have for Star Wars. These are really true Star Wars games that I feel like deserve to be on a list like this. And that's how the tier list ends up working out. In S tier, we have some amazing classics. Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, automatic must play. Star Wars Battlefront 2 from Pandemic back in 2005. Automatic must play. Star Wars Jedi Knight Jedi Academy, another must play. Lego Star Wars The Skywalker Saga, a phenomenal game that you need to check out. And Star Wars Jedi Survivor, most recently one of the best Star Wars games around as of late. That's really freaking good. If you haven't played it yet, I highly suggest that you do, either on an Xbox console or on PlayStation, wherever you can. It's really darn good.
Another happy landing.
Moving on to A tier. Star Wars Republic Commando, solid game. Star Wars Jedi Knight 2, Jedi Outcast, another solid classic. Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2, The Sith Lords. If you haven't played it, check it out when you can. Lego Star Wars The Complete Saga, another one. Lego Star Wars 2, the original trilogy. Star Wars The Force Unleashed. EA Star Wars Battlefront 2, and Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. All solid A-tier games. Have a couple issues here and there, but still games I could highly recommend that are interesting, or really good Star Wars games in general that any fan should definitely play. Moving on to B tier. Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, the game. The original Star Wars Battlefront from 2004. Lego Star Wars, the video game, the first Lego Star Wars. Lego Star Wars 3, The Clone Wars. Lego Star Wars, The Force Unleashed. EA Star Wars Battlefront 1, and Star Wars Squadrons. Again, B tier, games that have a little bit more issues than the previous one, but still games that I feel like you can enjoy, that are good Star Wars games for what they are, but aren't the best of the best as of yet.
A surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one.
So, moving on to C tier, Legos...
What?
Not Lego. I keep saying Lego. I always keep just in my head saying Lego. So C tier, Star Wars The Clone Wars, the first Clone Wars game, Star Wars Obi-Wan, Star Wars Starfighter Special Edition, Star Wars The Clone Wars Republic Heroes, and Star Wars The Force Unleashed 2. C-tier games have a lot more issues. They're Star Wars games. You could probably get some enjoyment out of them. You probably have some nostalgia for them, but they're not the best of the best. These games are just not as good as some of the other games that are higher up on the tier list. I wouldn't recommend them as far as like the best games to go to first, but if you're a big Star Wars fan and you're just curious about them, check them out and see how you like them.
I got a bad feeling about this.
And then finally, the last game in D tier, the only D tier Star Wars game on the Xbox ecosystem or the Xbox platforms, Kinect Star Wars. It's just kind of there. It utilized an accessory for the Xbox platforms that nobody cares about anymore. It was janky. It was weird. It was an experiment, quote unquote, to try something different. But now with the advent of like VR games for Star Wars and like the Oculus or the PlayStation VR or the Vive, you know, there's much more better experiences that are doing what this game tried to do. So it's there, and nobody cares about it. That's the best way to describe it.
What?
There you go. That is the ultimate Star Wars games tier list for Xbox platforms. Hopefully all of you out there enjoyed this. Let me know if you agree or disagree with my placement in these rankings of all these Star Wars games on Xbox consoles in the comment section down below. Leave a like on the video if you haven't already. Show some love. Make sure you guys also subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. If you haven't already yet, go check out my ultimate tier list for Star Wars games on PlayStation platforms. It's a little bit longer than this video because there's so many different consoles to go through, including the handheld ones, the PSP and the PS Vita. But we did everything, much like what we did here, every Star Wars game on every single platform related to PlayStation in that video, and we got Xbox on here. Now I dread, because next, at some point, I'm going to have to do the Nintendo Ultimate tier list, which is going to be so many games. So many games. It's going to be ridiculous, son. But I'm going to have to take some time to do that. Kind of get like a little break in between this video and that video. And then maybe we'll also do like a PC and maybe even VR at some point. But let me know your thoughts about that. Which one do you want to see first down below in the comment section? With all that being said, I will talk to all of you again very soon.